Good evening, Stanley. My name is Vivian Nostroza, and he's Daniel Orias. We are a student of community psychology of the University of Frontera of Chile, and we are grateful to you accept this invitation to this interview. We are asked to conduct a thorough investigation of the trajectory of community psychology in the continent of Africa. For this reason, we have contacted to you with the purpose of the interview is to your perspective to the knowledge about community psychology in South Africa. In addition, we would like to inform that the information collected the interview will use exclusively for academic purpose. And this reason, we would like to request your permission to present this interview to the fellow master students and our teacher, Alba Zambrano. We ask you be patient and speak slowly, please, because our English is basic. The interview will last 5 or 8 minutes, and we'll ask you only 2 questions. The first one is, Danny?
What have been the main theoretical influence that have given rise to community psychology in South Africa?
I'm just writing this down quickly. Okay. I hope you can hear me all right. I'm in Johannesburg. So to answer your first question, the main theoretical influences that give rise to community psychology in South Africa. I think community psychology in South Africa really starts not so much from a theoretical basis, but from actual practical basis. And then the theory is joined up later on. As you will appreciate, the history of South Africa coming from a time of apartheid and discrimination informed the development of community psychology largely. So in many ways, community psychology is informed by praxis first and then theory later. Unlike development of other schools of psychology, maybe in Europe, which were more theoretical. So community psychology, excuse me, in South Africa developed very much from the experience of apartheid, discrimination, and the experience of racism, institutionalized racism. And so psychology in South Africa in the 50s and 60s was very much used as an instrument of social engineering in the apartheid time by the apartheid government. So a lot of psychology based on European psychology, based very much on a clinical model of psychology, was really focused on advancing the ideology of apartheid, so how to keep the races separate. And psychology was also part of making a case for that. So that's how psychology in South Africa developed in the 50s, 60s, 70s also. And during the 70s and 80s, when there was a bigger social unrest in the country, and even internationally, many other countries were supporting the anti-apartheid movement, then there was a development within the field of psychology, mostly in Black universities, because again, the universities were separate, white universities and Black universities, based on apartheid legislation. In Black universities, more psychologists were asking, is the psychology that we are teaching relevant for the country, for our context, for our struggle? And the conclusion was no. The psychology that we were teaching was very much a Western model of psychology. It was based very much on a medical model, very much a clinical approach that was focused on individual and not on community. It was focused very much more on curing rather than understanding the root cause of the problem. And the psychology that was taught in South Africa was a psychology that did not take into consideration the reality of the country. So it was almost outside of the country, outside of the context. It did not speak to the struggles of the people, the discrimination and the difficulties of the majority of South African people who are Black South Africans. And so out of that, developed in mostly Black universities an approach of psychology which was called critical psychology. Maybe that's now a theoretical adaptation. Critical psychology, which is really a way of asking questions about psychology in context, asking about what is happening in the country, what is the relevance of psychology, is psychology actually advancing ethics of the majority of people. So there was this development of critical psychology in the 80s, and this movement grew in most Black universities, and then it also was joined up by more progressive white universities. And by the late 90s, this movement of critical psychology gained more momentum. By this time, the country had also had its transition from apartheid to a new democracy. And so this whole body of knowledge that was called critical psychology became known as community psychology. So it moved from just a critical psychology with a few people asking relevant questions to a whole practice of psychology, which took on a very different theoretical approach to individual psychology. So now the question was, how can psychology be more accessible to the majority of people in the country? And the majority of people in the country were not able to access mental health services. And so accessibility was one of the features of the model. The other feature of community psychology was the contextualization of mental health. So the question was not only curing mental health issues through therapy and psychiatric care, but the question was also what is the cause of people's mental health and distress? And a lot of that was related to the context of poverty, unemployment, still discrimination. So those were the systemic causes of mental health issues in the country. And so that became a big part of the focus. And then there was also a question of approach, the models. The models were mostly clinical, individual, and so there was a development of a more community-based approach, which involved more research in communities. It involved more engagement with local people groups, and it was more grassroots, if you like. The psychology came from the people and not imposed from a theoretical or academic institution. So that was another development that strengthened community psychology in practice. So in many ways, by the 90s, the discipline of community psychology was developed and was offered as a separate specialization. Up to that time, we had clinical psychology, counseling psychology, educational psychology, industrial psychology, and now we had community psychology as a separate discipline that was recognized and registered. In 1993, I had opportunity of doing my doctorate in community psychology. So by that time, community psychology was developed as a distinct specialization in the country. So maybe let me stop there. I hope that gives you some sense. So to sum up, community psychology started not theoretically, it started from practice and then developed into critical psychology, and that grew into what we now understand and call community psychology in South Africa.
Okay, Stanley, thank you. Can you mention some university with incorporated Black people in this development?
Yeah. Yes, the university that I went to was, when I did my master's in psychology, was called at that time University of Durban Westville. It later became joined up with the white university post 94. It's now called the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So that was one of the universities that was quite at the forefront. The other university was University of Western Cape. The other university was University of Fort Hare. All of these were traditionally Black universities that were at the forefront of the development of community psychology. Now, in 2024, we don't have the racial separation in the universities. And so in this moment, we have other universities like University of Wits, University of Stellenbosch, where were very big, wide universities that have now also adopted community psychology as part of their training and teaching.
Okay, and the answer 3, it's what is the field of application of community psychology in South Africa, professional and disciplinary?
Professionally, most community psychologists would work. They would work either at a community level, so in community psychology clinics or hospitals that are in a more rural community-based setting, and most of their work will be focused around health promotion and advocacy. So that's one level where community psychologists will be. The other group of community psychologists in South Africa would be working with NGOs, non-profits, non-government organizations, and most of their work is in advocacy for mental health. So it's in, raising awareness of mental health issues, access to mental health, the cost of mental health, barriers to mental health, and they would be campaigning or advocating for mental health access through the respective NGOs. And a third group, I would think, are working in government to look at the mental health of South Africans as a nation and a population. And of course, the last group would be in universities, the ones that are doing the teaching. Yeah.
Okay. Finally, could you tell us about your professional career?
Yeah, I trained initially. My first training was Masters in Counseling Psychology. I graduated in 1990, and I did an internship at a large South African company, corporate. And so I served my internship within an organizational setting, and I did individual clinical work, I did organizational work, and counseling. And I then moved into, I stayed in the organizational part, and then I moved into human resources and moved through from low level to director of human resources. But all the time, I had a part-time private practice as a psychologist. So most of my work was within the organization. And then I did my doctorate in community psychology. And after that, I joined a global NGO, a human rights NGO that was global. And so I worked there also in organization development, but I was able to bring a lot of my community psychology training into the global human rights space. 2017, I left there, and I've been working as a consultant from 2017 to now. So I work with human rights organizations in leadership development, community development, and I also run a private practice on a smaller scale, part-time.
Thank you for your time.